closing out the episode is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now this is a video I hope doesn't come out too bad, as out of over 100 of these videos, my video on Sonic 1 is probably my least favourite. I don't mind the "oh I died, here's some referential audio or video clips show how annoyed I am" thing, but I did it too many times, too close together. It was early days and I was still working out how I was going to present things. I'm still working on it now over 2.5 years later. But as for this game, I did play it a lot back in the day, but the least of the original Mega Drive trilogy. The first was one of the first games I ever played, and whenever I did have a choice between the three, I would go for Sonic 3 more often. My main exposure to it happened when I was about 9. My parents had split up, so for a couple of years my dad moved back in with my grandparents, so I was there just about every weekend. My uncle had the Sonic compilation cartridge, so I'd spend many Saturdays with the Mega Drive trilogy and Mean Bean Machine. Still got that cartridge, along with that original Sonic 3 he had. When he started to lose interest a bit, I silently commandeered them. As for plot, after the first game, Sonic went off in his plane, the Tornado, to find new places to explore. He discovers West Side Island and goes for a run, eventually noticing he's being followed by a young fox, Tails. Tails' constant attempts to keep up with Sonic and to be like him, along with his mechanical skills and interest in Sonic's plane, they quickly become best friends. Then it turns out Eggman's on the island, back to turning animals into robots and gathering the Chaos Emeralds, including the newly discovered 7th one. And he's building his huge flying fortress for Death Egg, so they gotta go deal with that. I'll cover the game in a similar way to how I did Sonic Chaos, alternating zones between Sonic and Tails playthroughs, starting with Sonic in Emerald Hill Zone. Just Sonic alone for this playthrough. Normally in a casual playthrough I will have Tails following me, but this will make getting all the Chaos Emeralds much harder than it needs to be. The only gameplay change for Sonic from the first game is the addition of the Spin Dash. Apart from that, we have the coconuts throwing coconuts down from the trees at me, along with mashers almost identical to the first game's choppers, fish jumping out from under bridges. Buzzers are also here, just a new version of the Buzz Bombers. I also got the shield, which has been slightly redesigned. As you can see, I'm going slow and getting every ring I can, as I want to get as many Chaos Emeralds as early as possible. It will make things much simpler for me. In this case it has me mainly sticking to the higher route of the level as I have bigger groups of rings together. Just as I reach 51 rings, there's a checkpoint next to it. This time, crossing a checkpoint with over 50 rings will have some stars circling around it. Jumping in starts a special zone. I have 3 sections of running across this half pipe collecting the amount of rings the game asks for. I wasn't a huge fan of Motion Sickness Zone from the first game, but this is my least favourite special zone of the Mega Drive trilogy. I don't have fun with it, it gets needlessly frustrating later on, and having Tails makes it even worse, always taking rings and then losing them running into every bomb. That's why I'm doing this playthrough with Sonic alone. This first one is very easy though, and you should never be in any danger of not getting enough rings, and so I get my first Chaos Emerald. Back to the level, and what really helps me is that while the checkpoint stays used, all the rings respawn, so I backtrack and collect them all again. After that I take the always fun corkscrew and drop down to the bottom route to collect more rings. When I roll back up to the middle, I find my second checkpoint. The second special zone is also an easy one, although I have had runs where Tails has killed it for me. The fact you can just stay still and not move to gain your first 30 rings out of the required 50 helps, so I end up passing with 15 more than I needed. I will say that I am very grateful for my ring count carrying into the next section. They could have made it so that I needed to grab another 50 rings every time, but getting 65 in the first section means I only need to grab 35, and then the extras once again go to making the third section easier. The third section does introduce the annoying parts where you have to run up the sides fast enough to go across the top of the screen while also getting the right speed and timing to actually collect the rings up there. I always struggle with those, but that's all there is to say and I get my second Chaos Emerald. Another upside to all the rings resetting is all the extra lives I can gain in this zone from collecting 100 of them after each reset. After the checkpoint I take a couple springs up to the top route and find some moving platforms across to a third checkpoint on top of the loop. The first section mainly deals with alternating rings and bombs in the same place, so it's easy to know when a bomb is going to show up so you can avoid it. Second section seems complex with the winding line of bombs and then the sheer amount of them on the sides, but you never actually have to move. You can stay put in the middle and just jump over most of it and avoid the rest. Can't tell what goes on in the third section because my footage corrupts and I've suddenly got more rings than I need to grab my third Chaos Emerald. Once again I repeat the ring collection but don't find another checkpoint, as a little further is the end of the act. I have never spent so long on Emerald Hill Zone Act 1 in my life. As for Act 2, you can see me swapping between the two routes mostly at an almost snail's pace. I don't trust an unexpected projectile from an off-screen enemy to not hit me. Right after getting 50, you can see me nearly have a heart attack from this buzzer. Clearing out most of the rings by this point gets me over 100 and watch this spring almost make me have a second heart attack. Go back to the first place I nearly got hit and jump across the tops of these loops to a checkpoint. This fourth special zone is where things start to get tricky. If you don't already know ahead of time which side the rings will be on as the half pipe turns, you will miss the first few each time. It also has those triangle shapes I hate where it's impossible to grab them all without a second player. Second section is a dick, jumping from one side to the other of the bombs, until they try to trick you into jumping into more bombs. Not much to say about the third section, mainly a load of triangle shapes and I get my 4th Chaos Emerald. Collecting all the rings is harder this time thanks to an arsehole buzzer hanging off screen and sniping me. This is why I never do this playing casually. Going for all emeralds just ages you. I managed to reach 50 from checking out the area above the first checkpoint and then move from the bottom of the level until I reach the next one. This is where the special zones really start to become spiteful pricks. I've already mentioned the triangular ring layouts and the ones in the air that are hard to get at once. This one combines them. Almost every set of rings is in that layout. Not to mention the ones that are half on the half pipe and half in the air. The second section gives you plenty of rings to grab with these winding lines, but this section is also very short, so a single slip up could just tank it. The third section not only has the triangular groups of rings in the air, but also hides them on turns, so you absolutely have to know they'll be there. I may have finished with 12 rings more than I needed, but it feels like I just scraped by. And so I run back along the bottom of the level picking up the rings again and come back along the middle route finding one more checkpoint. This one is asking for the most rings so far, wanting 80 from the first section. And it's pretty strict. I get by with 88 rings, but you really can't miss many of them. The second section has a nightmarish loop of rings that goes into the air. Get a few rings in the air and it can mess you up when you land and make you miss the easy ones. But I managed to pass with 161 rings. But then I have to get 210 rings for the last section. But actually, this one isn't too bad. Most of them are easy to get and most of the bombs are shown enough in advance. And that's 6 Chaos Emeralds obtained in the same zone. I tried to do another gathering of 100 rings, but I end up too short when I move on past the checkpoint for the first boss, Eggman and his drill tank. Thanks to my time in 2006 and 7 messing with Mugen, I still have to remind myself that stupid little drill tank isn't the official name. It's actually easier than the first boss from the first game. He'll just drive back and forth across the screen and all I have to do is avoid the drill and jump on him. After 7 hits he'll try shooting the drill at me, but then one more hit does him. I then jump on the capsule to release the animals. Emerald Hill is a fine first zone, but I've always preferred Green Hill, both in appearance and music. So we'll swap over to the Tails playthrough, but before I get into the next zone, let's talk about him, since I didn't really in the Sonic Chaos video. Gameplay wise, Tails is identical to Sonic. His flight is limited to when he's an NPC. I won't be doing the Chaos Emeralds as Tails because I've already done them as Sonic and Will as Knuckles and I don't even get a single thing for getting them as Tails. But yeah, I've always liked Tails. While I actually prefer the modern designs to most Sonic characters, Classic Tails is the one I prefer in this case, it's just so much more cute and endearing. I also just like having him follow me around as Sonic, and those few times where he does become a hindrance don't undo that. The special zone situation in this game is the only reason I don't have him follow in this Sonic playthrough. I will say that Tails in the more recent games kind of gets on my nerves. I think it's just the way the dialogue is written in certain games. I don't know, it just feels like they really want to do witty banter between Sonic and Tails, but it's not witty, just shit. But it's just for Tails really, I can cope with anyone else. But while I'm at it, is the "it should just be Sonic and Eggman only forever" crowd still around? I saw that a lot all the time in 2007 and 2008 and I never got it. Say what you will about the different eras of the series, but can you imagine how dull it would be if not a single new character was introduced after the first game? Yeah, there's some crappy and forgettable characters, but that's just an inevitability in a long-running series, they can't all be winners. You can't trap the series in 1991 forever because you're angry they created Marine the Raccoon. One last note. Fucking hell, am I glad I wasn't creating YouTube content back then. I watched a few of the Sonic YouTubers from that time when I was an impressionable teenager. I'll not name names because it was 14 to 15 years ago and I bet most of those people have moved on. And I just dread to think about the kind of shit I would have put out there back then. But now it's time to cover Chemical Plant Zone Act 1. First thing I do is jump up to the first monitor I see so I can run across the other tube and take the top route. There's the grabber, which grabs, and the spiny, which is a prick. If I jump at it, it will always hit me with its projectile at the very last second. I follow the tubes around a loop, down at high speeds, and then get bounced to the right where we get these tubes firing this blue liquid between each other. Bounce up a string, go right a bit and get one of the most fun automated sequences there is. Like, I'm not touching any button and I'm still enjoying it. Right through the tube, go left of the descending block staircase thingy, then just run right to the end of the level. Act 2 was the one I always struggled with as a kid. Most playthroughs would end here and I'd reset the Sonic compilation cartridge I was playing on to play the other two games and get my ass kicked there instead. I take the long tunnel down and get flung up high, but miss the chance of taking the top path and end up going through the middle instead. Continuing right, and many times I tend to get killed here. I'd end up standing on the leftmost block as it rises and then get crushed by the rotating ones above me. Once I climb up, I go right and bait the next rising block up, but sneak underneath to grab the shield and invincibility. Then I waste all of that invincibility failing to bounce back out. I take the blocks up, go right a little, and then climb up to the left and enter another tunnel. It spits me out next to a speed boost that sends me flying downhill to another of those tunnels. It takes me to another speed booster that sends me rocketing downhill again and flings me up to a higher level where I have to navigate past this rotating blockchain to another speed booster. The spring it sends me into fails to work and drops me below. You know, every time, I think I'll find a way to avoid the rising water shaft. This is the cause of all my childhood game overs, missing a jump and falling a great distance with no chance to get back out before the drowning music kicks in and my time runs out. But this time I did most of it before the water reached me, so it was fine. Then comes these moving platforms, reason number 2 that this section caused most of my game overs. Either I forget and run straight into the water, or I overthink jumping between the two and mess it up anyway. Reason number 3 is this right here. Every time without fail. I drown, then I realise I hadn't crossed a single checkpoint yet. Next time I'm prepared and I climb the moving platforms to finally reach a checkpoint, keep going right and meet Eggman once again. Only the middle section is safe, as both edges keep moving away to drop me to my death. Eggman himself just tries to drop that blue liquid on me. It's normally easy. The tricky part is that if you do get hit, there's a good chance the knockback will drop you in the pit. So just don't get hit. He's close enough to you that 8 hits should take no time, and that's Chemical Plant Zone. It's a good zone with great music, but I'm still harbouring that childhood grudge 20 years later, like a responsible adult. I will say, it bothers me how much this zone gets reused in anniversary games above any other. Like, some people say they're sick of it always being Green Hill and Chemical Plant. You know, Generations, then Mania, then Forces. But I'm not too bothered about Green Hill coming back. But when it keeps coming back with Chemical Plant, it drives me mad. Like it being 2 of them emphasises the overuse more. I said this before in the Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden video about how continued use of Goku doesn't cross my mind, but it's emphasised more when it's always Goku and Vegeta. And Chemical Plant is the Vegeta in this case. Before I move on to the next zone, there's important stuff in Sonic's playthrough. So, question. Does Act 1 just not have any checkpoints or anything? In none of my 3 playthroughs did I ever get a single checkpoint in this act. A bit of a tease when I just need 1 Chaos Emerald. So let's talk about that final special zone then, when I reach it in Act 2. This one starts with asking for 100 rings, but I actually find this easier than in the last one. Most of them are easy to grab just jumping back and forth between each side of the half pipe. Next section wants 150 rings and once again it's just going from left to right. It does trick me a bit by having 2 rows on the left side in a row, but other than that, it goes fine. I end up with 18 more than I needed. This leaves me only needing to grab 32 for the 190 he asks for in the 3rd section. But now the rings are spread out individually all over the place, then a shitload of bombs to dodge. I found the best way to just pick one spot and sway left to right. It gets close when I hit a bomb and fall below the 190, but I get back and gain the final Chaos Emerald, gaining the ability to become Supersonic. Now it's time for Aquatic Ruin Zone Act 1. We've got pillars rising from the ground to block my path, arrows being fired in from off screen. We have Grounder, I always forget that is the enemy's actual name and not made up for the cartoon. I just keep to the top path, which is quite easy with few enemies. We have the not very interesting wisps I just plough through. And then I finally get the 50 rings that transform me into Supersonic when I jump, making the form's first ever appearance. And that's basically the level, as I get launched way up to the top of the screen and with my invincibility, I can hold left until I reach the end. Act 2 now. Right away there's some swinging platforms to jump across, but I get impatient and land in the water below. I follow the path right through a tunnel and it's not long before I'm back out. A spring launches me up to a higher section, but I have trouble building up the rings for Supersonic thanks to more off-screen arrows and surprise grounders bursting from the walls in front of me. I end up on the bottom path when a spring launches me through a loop and I don't jump in time at the end, but at least we have air bubbles down here. Continuing right, bouncing up a spring and spin dashing right some more takes me to Eggman. As these pillars rise from the ground, I stand on one and ride it up for a cheap hit. I make sure to keep landing on the pillar so I don't have to engage with the proper strategy. There is a weird moment where I get hit by an attack almost a full second after said attack has already ended, but I manage to stay up there the entire time and finish him off. Aquatic Ruin Zone is fine. In terms of water zones, I like it much more than Labyrinth Zone anyway. The arrows still get on my nerves though. And now for Casino Night Zone Act 1. While Springyard Zone last game has some similarities, this is the first true casino level in the series. I bounce a good distance from the pinball flippers, avoid the bumpers, keep heading right and ride this slow block upwards. The flippers up top send me into a wall of bumpers that drop me down. I try taking on this crawl, but with its bumper shield it's almost impossible to kill. I run across the conveyor to the right and drop down into a pinball table. Simply spin dashing along the right side lets me run through a hidden passage. Then right some more takes me to another pinball table with an exit around the bottom. Hold the button on this big spring to pull it in and then launch me across more bumpers to a lift that takes me to another lift that brings me to a flipper that launches me across to the big pinball table with a slot machine. I just drop down the middle and roll down to another flipper that sends me flying to the signpost at the end. For Act 2, I tried to use a spring at the beginning to reach the top route, but just failed to reach it and take the middle path instead. I use a spring and keep going right. I tried to use these flippers to get to the top route, but give up after a couple tries and just stick with the middle path. Continuing through the middle path eventually takes me to another of those big springs that sends me straight up into this pinball table. The trick is to just drop through the bottom, but I fail at even that as I end up in a loop of dropping into this big spring in the top right corner constantly. Eventually I finally drop through and move right past all these bumpers to a lift that takes me to a spring to another pinball table. Dropping through the bottom and going right takes me to another pinball table where I finally meet up with Eggman again. This time he drops spiked balls from the bottom of his Eggmobile, and when not, it has an electric barrier at the bottom. So I have to either use the flippers to hit him, or spin dash up the walls and jump into him. Flippers can be a bit tricky though, as it can hit the bumper above you and knock you flying into his barrier. The bumper gets me hit a couple of times, but I take him down first try. Casino Night Zone is a lot of fun to mess around with the flippers and all that. Not my favourite casino level, but a good one. Before moving on, I'll just give my quick thoughts on Supersonic. First off, in this game I do dislike that jumping at all automatically activates it instead of requiring an extra button press. Because maybe you don't always want it. But yeah, I always liked Supersonic. For years until I got the internet, I didn't even know it was in this game. My first exposure was seeing the opening of Sonic 3 just thinking, what is that and how do I use it? But I never figured out how back then. But you know how as a young kid you reach some strange conclusions from the little information you have? Well, I saw a trailer for Sonic R that had a clip of Sonic jumping into water, then another clip of Supersonic running. Then I combined it with him jumping off a tornado in Sonic 3 and then flying back on screen Super, so I reached the obvious conclusion for a 5 or 6 year old. Supersonic is triggered by jumping into water. Water makes Sonic stronger, obviously. But yeah, it's funny, whether it's an unlockable or just used for the final boss, they always manage to make Supersonic feel rewarding no matter the quality of the game, or even the quality of the final boss I'm using Supersonic in. Supersonic turns 30 this year, and the novelty somehow hasn't worn off for me. I will say that it being inspired by Dragon Ball Super Saiyan has led to the unfortunate situation of people trying to extrapolate that into every single fucking thing in this franchise being inspired by Dragon Ball, and it's so tiresome. As of now, there are only 3 Dragon Ball inspired concepts in Sonic. Supersonic from Super Saiyan, the Sonic 3 special stages being inspired by Kaio's planet, and Silver being a tribute to Future Trunks. That's it, nothing else. Shadow is not inspired by Vegeta. Vegeta did not invent the concept of a rival to the main character that's similar in many ways, nor did he invent the trope of moody guy who crosses his arms and humps a lot. These existed long before Vegeta. No, Knuckles is not inspired by Piccolo, Amy is not inspired by Chi-Chi, Tails is not inspired by Kuririn, and Chaos is certainly not fucking inspired by Cell. Winds me up. My own gripes aside, and that is the last extended tangent I promise, it's now time for Hilltop Zone Act 1. I start by riding this little platform down the rope to the other side. Make sure to dodge a spiker trying to drill me from below when I jump over it. Further right we get the seesaw things from Starlight Zone, jump on one end and run to the other to get launched higher up. Speed through a tunnel, bounce on a seesaw, take a spring to a higher level, and a few more seesaws that take me up the mountains. At the top I get my 50 rings, ride the platform down and transform. I spin dash this loop to break my way into a cave. My invincibility lets me skip a ton of platforming as I can just drop to the left and land on the lava at the bottom with no damage. I take a spring up to a part where we start to have a cave in. The floor and ceiling slowly rise and Supersonic can still die from crushing. Eventually I reach a door and the lava I'm standing on lowers so I can pass into a tunnel that launches me on top of a loop. I use the momentum I still have for one more jump that takes me to the end of the level. For Act 2, I go into a cave and through a tunnel, meeting my first Rexon. They spit crappy fireballs and they're easy to kill. Through a loop and breaking through the floor is my first Gola. They are just like the Orbinauts from the first game but with fire instead of spiked balls. I still prefer to not bother with them. I ride the platform down and enter a cave with rising lava. I navigate all these moving platforms to reach the exit in the top right corner. After going downhill, I don't realise I even have 50 rings and end up transforming. This allows me to rocket off a spring and do another huge drop with no downsides. I exit the cave, go up a few springs and reach Eggman. And since I have over 70 rings, this'll be easy. He's supposed to rise from the lava and shoot fire at me. But with my invincibility, I can just stand below him and mash jump until he's done in seconds. Hilltop Zone is one I never give enough credit. It's a fun one, but I always forget it exists. I just keep getting excited for Mystic Cave whenever I finish Casino Night and it's always, oh yeah, this is in the way. Doesn't help that it has my least favourite of the main level music. But now for the best music track in the game, Mystic Cave Zone Act 1. At the beginning, I take the top path and keep going right and up. You get Crawltons in here. They'll retreat into the floor and pop out to damage you whenever you aren't in ball form. My attempt to stay high up doesn't work out as I get sprung down to a lower section. Next to this checkpoint is a vine I can grab that opens the floor below and lowers me. Continuing right, I climb up some moving platforms and the advancing spike walls to keep moving to another vine. But instead I climb another advancing spike wall, getting hit every step of the way until I can grab another that lowers a bridge in front of me. I continue taking this top route, making all the jumps but also running my ass into every spike on the way. At the end is another vine to ride down and I miss it, so I'm taking the bottom path once again. Leads to another vine that opens a bridge going left to another vine that lowers a bridge to another vine that takes me up. Then it's just right a little more to reach the signpost. Act 2 has me grab a vine to open a bridge to some moving platforms to platforms on swings that take me to a spring to another vine that opens another bridge. Then I just don't take it and drop to the bottom and take that path instead. It keeps going up and up until I reach another vine that lowers me to some moving crates I have to avoid being crushed between. Drop lower, grab another vine to open the way forward, and run right for a bit until this fucking pit. It's so easy to get pushed in, and once you do, you can't get out, just have to wait for death. Oh, and no checkpoint. Great. Of course, many people know this, but if you fall into that pit of supersonic with a large amount of rings, you are in for the longest wait for death. Thankfully that didn't happen for me in my Sonic run. Now I don't even know where I'm going, just desperately trying to avoid going anywhere near that pit. The nearest point I can drop myself in that's visually remarkable is this Hall of Springs. At the end is another vine to lower myself with that eventually takes me to a checkpoint finally. Just a little further is Eggman and his drilling machine. I get 3 hits in before he's even capable of damaging me. Then he drills into me and hits me, so I just brute force it and smash him to death with my post-damage invincibility. Mystic Cave is a good one with a great atmosphere and my favourite music. The only real flaw for me is that fucking pit. And now Oil Ocean Zone Act 1. Running forward we get the first Octus, which jumps up to spit shit at me. I run across these propellers and jump across the collapsing walkways to reach these green platforms that get shot up into the air. I take it to reach a higher route. I continue along this path and take another one even higher. I meet my first oil-spitting Aquis, and soon after I've reached my 50 rings to become supersonic. I take this moving platform higher up and go left to reach another, then going right takes me to another, followed by me dropping and sliding down oil. Attempts to stay up don't work and I end up at the bottom of the level. I do a bit more climbing and ride a series of those platforms up, keep going up and left until I reach this cannon thing that launches me for a series of like 8 more cannons, taking time that uses up quite a few of my rings. At this point, I admit I'm lost. I'm going downhill and left until I end up jumping into another cannon. Right, down a lift, jump against this fan until I finally break past it and just keep jumping to the end. As for Act 2, I keep moving right to a platform taking me up. I reach the leaping platform and stand on the middle one, which sends me into a cannon that takes me towards the top left of the level. I cross this bridge with a ring of spikes moving across it to a spring I have to push in to propel me even higher and cross another bridge to a platform that takes me even higher. Slide down some oil, get running downhill a bit and get myself in another cannon. The only thing is I can't keep myself from getting hit. I cross another bridge and ride a platform down to another downward moving platform. I then get another long cannon ride. Instead of going left like I'm prompted to, I jump up the oil floor and drop down to grab invincibility, before climbing back up and going the right way to a lift that takes me to another cannon to another bridge. I slide down a lot of oil and finally reach Eggman. He rises from the oil for a bit, letting me get a whole 5 hits on him. This spiked thing tries to jump into me and misses, followed by a laser that I just cannot dodge. If I avoid the first shot, the second always gets me. Then he rises again and I get the last 3 hits in. To be honest, I don't particularly care for Oil Ocean Zone. I just find it too much of a mess and I never feel like I'm getting anywhere. But I'd still take it over this slog. It's Metropolis Zone Act 1. I get hit by this steam and then stand on the pipe to get sprung up when it rises. We get the first Asteron and I hate these things. They explode into 5 spikes that go off in different directions, and many will be placed in the most infuriating locations. Continuing right, I hit a switch to create a bridge and bounce up to another enemy I hate, the Shellcracker. Always placed in the right spots to smack you in the face before you can even react to seeing it. Downhill, I press a switch to open a door going further down and then another. But for the third, I instead bounce up these bumpers and yet another enemy I hate shows up. I hate slicers for the exact same reason I hate the Shellcrackers. You have to know in advance that they'll be there, or you're fucked. I get incredible luck spin dashing over these spiked blocks and bounce up to a checkpoint. I then have to run down these corkscrews where they place a million Asterons, and if you dodge one, it'll put you in the path of another. They lead to a platform that lowers as I step on it, then continuing right takes me higher up again. Then I'm going up 2 corkscrews where somehow all the Asterons placed didn't go off. I press a switch to roll out a bridge but fall under it, so I'm going up another corkscrew and then down the one after. I'm constantly heading down while moving left and right until I'm jumping across more of these spiked blocks, then riding a moving platform under a ceiling of Asterons. There's a bit of bouncing and I finished the act. Well, that was tedious, but at least I'm half done. Right? Act 2 has me jump on a rotating platform, then get impatient in less than a second and spin dash myself into lava. This zone does that to me. I jump out, get in the tunnel thing and get bounced up and to the left where I climb over a pair of giant cogs to another of those tunnels. I jump the conveyor with the crushers and fail at staying on the top path, falling below and need to dodge a line of rising spears. I try jumping this gap, but another of those spiteful slicers is there and knocks me further down. I try a corkscrew, get hit by an Asteron and decide fuck it and just keep moving down. I end up getting bounced up, go around some cogs and make it to another corkscrew. I have a steam pipe bounce me up to a series of moving platforms, but there's an arsehole slicer waiting for me, so I just spin dash in the opposite direction and take that route. What follows is a long sequence of springs, corkscrews and steam pipes, as well as the usual cheap shots from all three enemies. Then is some cogs and the spiked blocks. You can tell a level is too long when there's still checkpoints almost 3 minutes in. The other annoying thing about getting sniped off a corkscrew is the backtrack you have to do to reset its positions. Fuck slicers. Still not done? Rotating platforms, spiked blocks, making bridges, more bouncing, more rotating platforms, even more climbing, and I finally reach the signpost. But then you realise there's no boss, because this motherfucker is the only zone in the game with a third act. So I believe this act was just leftovers from the incomplete Genocide City zone. They should have just scrapped it. I hate this. We get a new type of long moving platform and a shellcracker cheap shots me down to one below. I take a tunnel only to be killed by an Asteron. Next time I run past them and it's mainly just the same left and right going down while moving around giant cogs. I end up bouncing to another of the big platforms and climbing even higher with more springs, tunnels and steam pipes. Then comes the long sequence of spiked blocks, more cogs, another shellcracker getting an improbable hit and another tunnel followed by the longest corkscrew segment of them all. And then when I get all the way up to the top, avoiding getting sniped by an Asteron, there's a dickhead slicer waiting for me and knocks me down, so I have to restart the entire thing. I try to spin dash into the slicer because I don't trust the small space I have to kill it with a jump, but it doesn't work here and it kills me. Next time it's facing the other way and I can kill it and finally reach Eggman. It floats down surrounded by these eggs. Hitting him sets one free and it hatches into a smaller Eggman that can be popped with just one hit. Just keep knocking them off one at a time and the next hit after they're all done takes him out. I really hate Metropolis Zone. The first 2 acts each are too long and tedious and the enemies are all pricks, every one. Then you add a third act on top of that and it just becomes one of my bottom 5 zones from the Mega Drive trilogy. This zone is the reason most of my casual playthroughs end early, I just get fed up. Great music though. As if to make up for it, the remaining 3 zones are all 1 act each, starting with Sky Chase Zone. We're on the Tornado piloted by Tails, or by Sonic if you're playing as Tails. Tails will move the tornado as you move, but you can still fall to your death by spin dashing in certain ways that he can't catch you. The level itself is an auto-scroller. In terms of enemies we have the Valkyrie, which just flies across the screen. Then there's the Nebula. Going under has some shit spiky balls on you, and I get hit a lot because that propeller on their head tricks me into thinking I'll take damage if I jump on it. It's fine by the way. We then have the Turtloids, who have their giant jet turtles fire projectiles from their mouths. Eventually a giant flying fortress passes by and we get more enemies. Since this is an auto-scroller, not much else to say. Sky Chase isn't the best level in the game, but after Metropolis, it's nice to have a more relaxing stage with chill music. Just in time for my blood pressure to spike once again with Wing Fortress Zone. As we catch up to the fortress, laser fire shoots down the tornado. This level is covered in these things here that will dash you forward. They can be hard to see and some will just launch you into a pit without warning. Not good for your mood. I enter the fortress and follow the path out, hovering above giant propellers, taking out my first clucker. Very carefully climb to this rail and ride the floating platforms under the fires of the engines. I can now climb and run along the wings going left, avoid cannon fire, hover over some more propellers and jump up these quickly disappearing platforms to reach the roof. Follow the path right to some platforms that take me higher, avoid another of those launching bastards, and follow the path to the end where I have to start descending. Once I hit the bottom, I get sent flying out and have to drag myself along these metal plates and not get flung to my death. Following that is climbing down these also downward moving platforms, a lot more stressful than it looks. Then I have to quickly jump across this chain of rapidly disappearing platforms, just barely making it. I'm not trusting the launching things, so I spin dash jump over this large gap. The path leads to yet more rotating platforms and some cranes to ride up. I run through the wall and land on an off-screen launcher, sending me flying to the right, making me shit myself. I climb back up to the roof and after the checkpoint smash through the floor to reach the boss. Eggman laughs at me from behind a barrier and has a laser move along the ceiling along with 3 tiny platforms with spiked bottoms. The laser will open, charge and shoot a big beam that moves along the roof for a bit. I can only hit it in the time while it's open and charging. This is one of the few bosses I can't easily cheese, so I actually have to put effort in. The easiest strategy for me is to hang out on top, jumping between the 2 topmost platforms so I can get my hits in quicker. Once the boss is destroyed, the barrier is gone, but Eggman's taking off in a rocket. But our partner manages to fix up the tornado and gets us close to the rocket so we can grab the side and ride it into space. Along with Metropolis, Wing Fortress is in my bottom 5 for zones from the Mega Drive trilogy. I didn't do so bad in this playthrough, but the bullshit of having those launcher things that can just ruin you out of nowhere this far in a game with no save feature is criminal. 90% of playthroughs that get past Metropolis end on a rage quit on this zone. Or I reach it on my last life, then surprise launch motherfucker, game over. In fact, my original attempt at recording this game ended the same way I just described, which ended with a rage quit and a rage delete of the footage. Hate. Being able to utterly trivialise this level of Supersonic and finish it in less than half the usual time felt magnificent. The rocket takes us to the final level, Death Egg Zone. Like Final Zone in Sonic 1, no rings because fuck you. I walk forward and get attacked by Mecha Sonic. As it flows down, I spin dash in place to damage it 4 times before it does a spin dash of its own. I hit it in the face before it tries to zoom across the screen at me. If I time a jump right, I can hit its face and go through it without dying. We'll then try jumping on me and I can get the last hit in. Not my favourite Sonic robot, but I've always liked it for how chunky it is compared to the others and the unique colour scheme. I then chase Eggman until he jumps into the final boss, the Death Egg robot. This is a pain. It has spiked fingers that move when it walks and I only just have the jump height to hit him over them, so you've got to time it well. After a few steps he'll fly up and make it drop on me. There's a target on me so I wait for it to turn red then run out of the way. I get one jump in and then run to avoid its rocket punches. I then continue to repeat this pattern. This is the hardest final boss in the Mega Drive trilogy to me. It only looks like I'm doing so well because Sonic's playthrough I actually recorded last of the 3, so I'd gotten used to it by then. In the end, it takes 12 hits to defeat. Escaping the explosion of the Death Egg, Sonic's ending shows the animals watching it explode. Tails is watching too and gets in the tornado to catch him. But since I have all the Chaos Emeralds, Supersonic is fine and flying down to Earth, joined by Tails flying beside him, and they pose for the screen. For Tails, we don't get to see any of that. We just see him falling from space until Sonic catches him with the tornado, and then they do the posing. Now I'm not quite done with the game. There's a multiplayer mode, where 2 players can race through Emerald Hill, Casino Night, Mystic Cave, and a special zone. Of course, with no second player, I can only play it alone. The main things to point out are the item monitors being randomised, including a new item that swaps the players' locations. The other thing is that the 3 non-special zones all have new music for the second player modes, but I prefer all their original tracks over the multiplayer. That's all for now, now it's time for the last thing to talk about. Of course, there's Knuckles the Echidna in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, from attaching Sonic 2 onto the Sonic & Knuckles lock-on cartridge. This one stayed out of my reach for years as a kid. My uncle had sold his original Sonic 2, and by the time I discovered I could combine the two, he only had that game on Sonic Compilation, which just triggered the Blue Sphere game when locked on. So I never got to try this out for myself until I got Sonic Mega Collection a few years later. There are some small aesthetic changes that I believe were made because of how Knuckles' colour palette affected the game. So the title cards for the zones are now green, and the shield is now grey. But apart from that, Knuckles plays just like he does in Sonic & Knuckles, jumping lower but having the ability to glide and climb walls. I think the biggest surprise to me when I first played through as Knuckles was learning they made an entirely new sprite for the special zones. I was expecting them to have reused the sprites from the Blue Sphere stage. Speaking of special zones, you retain your rings when finishing one, which makes it much easier to get access to a second in the same zone, less need the backtracking. When we get to Chemical Plant, that's when we see how different the game can be as Knuckles. Lots of places to climb, and if I find a high enough spot, being able to glide over massive chunks of the level. Monitors were even put in places you couldn't reach otherwise as a way to encourage exploring these old levels. Unlike Sonic, getting all the Chaos Emeralds and 50 rings allows Knuckles to transform into Super Knuckles. The only letdown I have with Super Knuckles is that his isn't as impressive as Super Sonic. I'm fine with the glowing pinkish white, but it's the fact that since it's flashing, half the time he's still his normal colour. But I will say I'll take it over a yellow bubble like in Sonic Heroes. Best part about Knuckles in Chemical Plant is that you can climb the bastard water shaft. Very cathartic. In Mystic Cave, I actually transformed as I was being pushed into the infamous pit. The bridge acts as a ceiling, so Super Knuckles can't even climb out, just have to wait for death. Now Metropolis Zone I still hate as Knuckles, but his gliding and climbing makes this level so much more bearable. The Asterons are easier to avoid when I have more control. It's for this reason that in this game I enjoy playing as Knuckles more than Sonic, and my casual playthroughs as Knuckles always last longer. But there is one big downside which we'll get to soon. Nothing to say about Sky Chase other than between the two choices of pilot they went with Tails. Wing Fortress is also far more bearable with Knuckles' glide, really cuts down on the bullshit. But then we reach the Death Egg robot, which is pure hell, the hardest part of any playthrough between all three characters. You cannot attack it when it is standing, as Knuckles' low jumps will just send him into the spike fingers and kill him. You have to wait for the jumps and get your hits in as the body wobbles down. But there's still a problem. You can just phase through the robot as you hit it and just die anyway. This was the cause of most of my deaths. I've been doing so well, but then it just goes through the robot and dies. I had 8 lives and 3 continues when I started this fight. By the time I finally had the luck to get 12 consecutive hits without that, I had 1 life and 1 extra continue remaining. We get the same images from Sonic's ending, however Super Knuckles still stands on the tornado instead of flying with it before he Shoryukens the camera. And that is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. If you watched my earlier Sonic videos, you'd see that on my checklist I listed the regular game and the Knuckles In version separately. That was because I do plan to cover Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles each as their own separate game, as they really are different experiences. And I just did the same here based on that decision. But here I decided that there was no point. Knuckles in Sonic 2 doesn't feel like a different game, so I'm just counting the entire thing as one. So here's the thing. I like Sonic 2, and I'll get to the positives, but I like Sonic 1 more. But every time I start this game, and even when I was watching back the footage for this video, I always think, why do I keep thinking I like the first game more? This is great. And then I clear Mystic Cave Zone and remember why. I enjoy the game a lot less past the 6th zone. Oil Ocean doesn't do it and Sky Chase is fine, but I really hate Metropolis and Wing Fortress and they are so long. With the first game I only really disliked Labyrinth. The special stages are less preferable to getting the motion sickness I got from the first game. These things wouldn't be an issue if I could save, and that's my biggest problem with the game. It's too long for a game with no save feature. I put off doing this game for a while because I didn't want to deal with the huge losses in time I'd have from a game over. But the positive, those first 6 zones are fun and even the weakest ones of them are still fine at worst. The soundtrack is even better than the first game, it looks great, and when I'm having fun, it's just so much more fun to play. The extra speed in Sonic Spin Dash makes it just feel so good when you get going. Plus it introduces Tails and Super Sonic, and despite what the people who whine about anyone but Sonic say, they make the franchise so much better just by being there. So it's still a good game, just one I like a little less than most people. One last thing, while this is not the 100th game I finished for this show, it is the 100th unique ranking. So after the next video, which will be Arabian Magic's music ranking, I'll just put a no commentary video showing the ranking in video form as opposed to a scrolling list. The next episode is starting with Mortal Kombat 2, and I'm expecting it to be a long one when it's done, so I need all the extra time I can get while keeping my video every 5 days schedule going.